Hello everyone! Welcome back to the Advanced Pokemon Enterprise. My name is Demon Battler, and we are currently starting off Season 3. So last season, we were in the Rookie Division, which was the lowest of the 3 divisions available for Season 2. This time around, they decided to cut back in the divisions, and instead make it only 2. And with the release of Scarlet and Violet recently, they've decided to name the divisions after Annihilate as the higher tier, and Grafaiai as the lower tier. As you can see below me, we have Grafaiai, which means we're in the lower division. Now, you may remember me last season as the coach of the Miami Overheat. Well, we decided we're going to make a slight change to that, and we decided to travel out west. So, we're going to roll the dice on our luck, and we're going to say hello to the Vegas Golden Sir Knights. So, this is going to be an interesting development, and this is going to be a very fun season for us, mostly because we now have Scarlet and Violet Pokemon available to us for draft, which is really cool. Now, we're going to go through the draft rules real quick, just so that way those who don't know about this kind of thing, or those that have not paid attention to draft leaks very long, this will give a quick refresher. So to start with, the Advanced Pokemon Enterprise runs on a point system, with most of the Pokemon being available based on a number of points. There is a selected ban list, but we don't have to really discuss that much. So using 115 points, each team has to draft a roster of 9 to 11 Pokemon. You can pick as many as you want as long as it falls within that division line. In addition, coaches will get Terra Captains using 25 Terra points. Basically, the point value that you use to draft the Pokemon is also the point value you'll use to assign their Terra Captain status. So for example, if they have a Pikachu for 2 points available, then you can draft that Pikachu and use it as a Terra Captain using 2 Terra points. As such, if you can fill your entire team within 25 points, you can do so. If you choose to only use it on 1 or 2 Pokemon, you can also choose to do that, just as long as it falls within the 25 point limit. Then there are certain Pokemon, such as Rotom, different regional variants of Pokemon like Slowbro or Muck, where you cannot draft multiple forms for your team. So for example, you can't choose Rotom Heat and then Rotom Wash to go onto your roster. However, there are certain Pokemon such as Indeedee, Meowstic, Gourgeist, things where the form is different based on something simple like their gender or their size, and in that case, you will be given the exact same, you'll be able to take all of those different forms for it because they're all the same Pokedex number, and likewise, they don't have that much of a difference overall, compared to, say, Rotom, which changes its type and its move pool dramatically. Finally, during the season, each coach will have 4 picks that they can use as a free agent, meaning they can freely drop a Pokemon and add a Pokemon onto their roster. In addition, they can also change their Terra Captain throughout the season using a free agency pick, and they also receive 1 Grace token that they can use to get 30 minutes of free trades and swaps as they wish. However, we are only able to use these up until the end of Week 7. Once that is over, any extra points or tokens we have are going to be basically sent to the graveyard. We do not draw a card, we do not get anything to use them for. So, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started into our draft. We have 11 rounds to discuss, and we're going to go ahead and get straight to it. So round 1, we were number 9 out of 16. Yes, we actually expanded the draft into 16 teams per division, as opposed to the original 12. Now, we were number 9 in the pick, which was a snake draft, so we were basically middle of the pack the entire time, which did make things a little difficult. However, we did get some good Pokemon out of it, and the first one was one that I wasn't sure if we were going to actually get in time, but as it happened, nobody wanted to pick it up just yet. And I really like this Pokemon, I really like its abilities, I really like its typing, so we decided to go with Tapu Koko. This Pokemon is really freaking fast, it has a really good stat line, It has 130 speed, a really solid attack and special attack, and on top of that, the fact that it creates an electric terrain as soon as it hits the field means that it opens the door for a lot of different strategies. Unfortunately, there is one thing about it that I did not realize until later, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Now, for the second round, I wanted to have a Pokemon that I knew could be defensive, and that I knew could also be fairly strong offensively, as well as a good support mon. As such, I decided to pick a Pokemon that I really like, I definitely like to use in draft when I can, and again, surprisingly, it actually made it through to the second round. So we are going to talk about Heatran. And Heatran is actually my first chosen Terra Captain. So the reason for that is because Heatran has one main weakness: ground type. Basically, if it's on the field and you're not running an air balloon, an earthquake is going to tell this thing to go fuck itself. So, with that being the case, the Terra typing means that we can actually change its type to anything we want in a battle, which is kind of nice. And on top of that, it has Stealth Rock ability, it has the ability to trap Pokemon with Fire Spin or Magma Storm if we want. Probably not going to do that much, but still. And it has a decent enough move pool to where it's actually a fairly solid Pokemon overall. Looking at its stat line, it has a fairly solid HP stat, and it has fairly solid defense stats at 106 each, with a good 130 special attack. Its speed is kind of low, but it's honestly not that big a deal. Now, we decided to go into round 3, which was... honestly, this was where a lot of the Pokemon that were more defensive were starting to get looked at, and I wanted to pick up something that would fit into the Fire, Water, Grass, or Steel Dragon Fairy Core, because Heatran actually works really well as an anchor for both of them. But I also saw a Pokemon available that I really haven't used before in draft, and I really wanted to make use of it this time. So we decided for round 3 to pick up Cresselia. Cresselia is such a fun Pokemon, and quite frankly, I just love the fact that it's a really bulky thing, it's really good typing, it has Levitate, which is really nice, and I mean, look at these stat lines. Base 120 HP, 120 defense, 130 special defense. This thing is a freaking house, and it is amazing. Wait. Gen 8? We're in Gen 9. Oh no. No. Do not tell me that this thing got its stats changed. It did? It nerfed its defense and special defense? Are you fuck? Okay, so yeah, as it turns out, Cresselia got nerfed in Generation 9 by having its defense and special defense stat each cut down by 10 points, which actually drops it below a few pseudo-legendary Pokemon, which is insane. I really wish I had known that when I had drafted this Mon, but admittedly, I don't really regret it still, because 110 and 120 defenses is still really solid, especially with its HP stat. So, will we miss those points? Possibly, but who knows? Maybe we won't. We'll see about that. But, moving on to round 4. We really wanted to get a good, bulky water type, because Fire, Water, Grass is really strong as a core, but you definitely need something defensive for a water type, hopefully. You could always get a second water type that's offensive later on, so I looked at the listing, and I didn't want to pick up another high power Mon at the moment, because we had 3 Mons in a row that were over 10 points, and I wanted to have a little bit of wiggle room for the later parts of the draft. So we decided to go into the lower tiers a little bit, and we picked up our friend Araquanid. This thing is actually pretty good in its own right. The fact that it has an ability that lets it reduce fire attack damage and prevent getting burned is pretty solid. And when you look at its stat line, it's actually pretty decent. Base 70 attack is not really that great, but it does have access to healing, which is nice. Base 92 defense and 132 special defense is actually pretty good. Its HP stat could be a lot better, but honestly, it's still not the worst thing in the world. And if we end up with a Trick Room scenario going on, Araquanid is actually slow enough that it can be pretty helpful there. On top of that, it also has access to Sticky Web, which can help with speed control for us, which is really nice. So now we move on to round 5, and this is pretty much the point where my realization about Tapu Koko kicked me in the face. So the problem with Tapu Koko specifically is that it provides electric terrain as soon as it hits the field, which under normal circumstances is a really good ability because of the fact that it boosts electric attacks and it prevents sleep, so in general it's pretty good. However, there is one slight problem that Scarlet and Violet introduce: the Paradox Pokemon. Specifically, the future Paradox Pokemon. They all have an ability that allow them to get a boost to their highest level stat when they're on electric terrain, whether they're grounded or not, or they have a energy booster. So what that means is every future Paradox Pokemon will get a free buff if we have Tapu Koko against them, which is kind of a problem. And by the time I realized this, I also realized that a lot of the Iron Pokemon, the future Paradox, were already getting snatched up. And by this point, I really needed a Grass type. I really wanted a strong Paradox Pokemon to make use of the electric terrain. So we decided to come up with one of the newest Pokemon introduced, Iron Leaves. This thing is Grass and Psychic type, which is a somewhat decent typing, but it is very nice because it actually has a really solid stat line. Base 90 HP is not the worst thing in the world, especially with a base 108 special defense. That's pretty solid. Base 130 attack is really good, and base 104 speed is actually really solid as well. So, depending on how we set things up for the stats, there is a decent chance we can actually boost either or when we throw it out into the electric terrain. And the fact that it has quite a few strong moves on its own right definitely makes this helpful for us as well. Now, we moved on to round 6, and I actually decided I wanted to take a page out of Latner's book from last season, who, mind you, actually won the second season in the Grookey division using Tapu Koko and this next Pokemon in tandem. So we decided to say, screw this, we're picking up Hawlucha. Hawlucha is actually a really good Pokemon to pair with Tapu Koko, not only for the typing wise, because Koko is weak to ground and Hawlucha is immune to that, but on top of that, Hawlucha has a really solid stat line at 92 attack, 118 space speed, and honestly, the fact that it has Unburden means that you could throw an Electric Seed onto it, let it get the defense boost from that, and then it's going to get double speed, which thanks to its own ability, and it basically turns into a giant freaking wall breaker. So we definitely have to keep that in mind, and unfortunately that does mean that a lot of people are going to expect that as well. So we definitely need to make sure that counterplays cannot take us down. Now, moving on to round 7, we realized we really needed a Dragon type by this point, and most of the good Dragon types were already snatched up. In fact, by this point, 2 Dragon types that I really wanted to pick up, Goodra and Hisuian Goodra, both got sniped right out from under me. So we looked around, and I saw Salamence was available on the listing, and I originally picked it up. However, during the grace period, I realized that Salamence, while nice, does have a bit of a point cap where it was 13 points, which is okay, but given how many points I had left over, I really wanted to make use of the extra couple points. So I decided to trade a double weakness to ice for another double weakness to ice, and I still keep the ground immunity because we decided to switch it to Flygon. So Flygon isn't really better than Salamence. It's got the same speed stat, and I believe it has a slightly lower attack stat, and its base defense, and its defenses are not amazing, but at the same time, it can be useful for a setup mon if we can actually get to that point. And if worst comes to worst, we have a decent Pokemon that we could jump into to eat a ground attack thanks to Levitate. So we're going to see how that fares. If worst comes to worst, we could always swap it out. So now round 8 rolls around, and I decided I really wanted to pick up another fairy type, because as much as Tapu Koko is really good as an electric attacker, it only has, I believe, 2 fairy type attacks to work with, one of which is not really all that useful, because it's Nature's Madness. So basically, if I want to use Dazzling Gleam, that's fine, but I definitely want to have another fairy type to work with. And being the theme of having a defensive Pokemon available, I decided to pick up a Pokemon that I was actually surprised made it through round 8, and that was Sylveon. Sylveon is very well known in draft leagues. It is a very bulky Pokemon overall. It has really solid special defense. It has half-ass decent defense stats, but if you invest in it correctly, it can actually be a pretty good defensive mon that way too. It has a fairly solid special attack stat, and it has a lot of different abilities that it can make use of. It's granted, Pixelate is the most commonly used one, but sometimes Q-Charm does have its utility. And the fact that you could go between offensive with choice spec sets, or you could go defensive, or you could go wish passing. There's quite a few things you could do with a Sylveon. So round 9 rolls around, and we're really kind of reaching the low point of our points. And we definitely want to have what we can overall. So we decided we wanted to get another water type, and we also realized we need to get a ghost type on our team as a spin blocker just in case. So after looking at the list, I decided we settled on Jellicent. Jellicent's actually not too bad on its own. It's fairly defensive because of its high HP stat and solid special defense. Its physical defense is kind of low at only a base 70, but even then, it's not the worst thing to deal with, especially considering the fact that most electric and grass attacks are going to be special anyway, so it's not the worst to have as a lower defensive mon. And on top of that, it has a solid 85 special attack, which means that it can actually hit pretty, I'm not going to say hard, but it could at least hit decently on the crackback. So now we're into round 10 of 11, and I decided to go for a really low point Pokemon, and one I really enjoy. So, going back to Kalos yet again, we're picking up Furfrou. This dog is one of my favorite Pokemon from the Kalos region entirely, just because of its unique little gimmick and the fact that it actually has quite a few good things going for it defensively. First off, it has decent special attack and attack, which again is not really meant to be an offensive mon, it's more of a defensive creature, but still. Its HP is a little low, but it has decent special defense, a really solid 102 speed, which is kind of nice, especially when you consider it has access to things like Charm, Thunder Wave to slow opponents down, stuff like that. It's pretty nice. And then when you look at its defense stat, it does look kind of low at base 60, but it actually isn't that bad because it has the ability of Fur Coat. What Fur Coat does is it literally doubles the defense of the Pokemon that has the ability. So I actually looked at the calcs, and based on 0 IVs, 0 EVs, and a neutral nature, that basically bumps Furfrou's base defense from base 60 up to base 122 with no investment, which is actually quite impressive, really. So honestly, it makes it pretty good, and on top of that, it has the ability to use an attack called Cotton Guard, which can boost its defense by 3 stages, which that alone is already a massive buff. So I mean, really, it has a lot of potential as a good defensive mon. So overall, I definitely say Furfrou is a good pick, and I decided to make Furfrou my second of 3 Terra Captains, the reason being, Furfrou as a normal type only has 1 weakness, and if I feel like Furfrou is about to get exploited with that weakness, I can always use the Terra form to change its typing into something to help resist that fighting weakness, which is kind of nice. And now we're on to the final round, where I really didn't know what I wanted to do here, and at the time I still needed to figure out how to use points. I needed to hold on to some points in order to make use of them during Grace Period, And at the time, I decided to pick up Altaria, which was I believe a 1-point pickup, which left me with 1 spare point. But then, once Grace Period rolled around, and I got rid of Salamence, I was able to switch out Altaria. Excuse me. I was able to switch out Altaria as well, which got me Flygon, and it gave me a few extra points. So, with the 5 points I had left over, I decided to pick up our last Pokemon, Hitmonchan. Hitmonchan is a bit of an odd pick, but I really enjoy this Pokemon. It's one of my favorites from the Kanto region, and the fact is, it actually has a decent stat line. Base 76 speed is not amazing, but considering it has 2 different priority attacks, that's kind of okay. Its base HP is really bad, which kind of bites, but it does have solid defense stats and really good special defense, and its physical attack's actually not too bad either, considering the fact that it also can carry the ability Iron Fist to boost its punching moves. That means that we can actually get Bullet Punch and Mach Punch some extra power, which is nice. And since we had a few extra points, and realistically speaking, Hitmonchan has a decent little bit of variety in its move pool, we decided to make Hitmonchan our 3rd Terra Captain. Do I think it's an odd pick? Definitely. Do I think it's going to be effective? Probably not. But hey, we never know. I mean, last season I thought Togekiss was going to be just a big bulky balloon to deal with, and as it turned out, she turned into our biggest offensive weapon. So, who knows? Maybe Hitmonchan will surprise us. So, with that being said, this is our full roster right here. This is going to be our team, at least for the first week. Once the first season rolls around, once the first week passes by, we're going to see where our team's cracks lie and see what we can do to try to patch those up. Whether it being swapping things around or just changing out movesets and ideas. But either way, we're going to see what happens. But now comes the next part. Before we get into the season, which we'll show at the end of the video, we're actually going to show you guys the rest of the division, which was one thing I kind of regret not doing last season. So, before we wrap things up, we're just going to go ahead and show off everyone else in the Grafaiai division, as well as their rosters, so that way you have an idea of what we're going to be facing off against. So, with that being said, enjoy the rest of the teams, and we will see you guys next week.